here. Good morning. I'm Rachel Christensen.
That's right. This is a service.
It is. I'm going to mute everybody now. And here we are. We are going to begin with our music director, David Chapman, playing Joe from Working. David?
Thank you, David. Good morning. Welcome to Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church, meeting here online. I'm Clark Ritz. My pronouns are he and him. I'm one of a team of worship associates that works with a minister, church staff, and others, bringing you worship services like this one.
I tried to change it, but
even when it's...
Hang on, Clark. Clark, I muted you in the middle because I muted everybody. And so we lost your introduction after, I'm trying to think of what you were saying at that moment. But
I will start again.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church, meeting here online this morning. I'm Clark Ritz. My pronouns are he and him. I'm one of a team of worship associates that works with the minister, church staff, and others in bringing you worship services like this one, even when it's best we don't meet in person. We strive to be a welcoming community. We're from all over. Our families have come from different countries. Among us, we have a range of sexualities. We have a range of shapes and sizes and appearances and identities. We have different physical abilities from one another, and we've been waiting for you to join us. And we acknowledge, though we are not in our physical church spaces, that the land where our church's building stands is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people, who have a history in the region stretching from the Potomac River towards the Chesapeake Bay, going back thousands of years. Whatever brought you online this morning, we're so glad you decided to share the morning with us. Before we move into worship, let's remember our Zoom skills. Find your mute button and make sure you're muted throughout the service. This button is in different places on your screen, depending on what kind of device you're using. You can set your own pace, scrolling up and down the chats. And later in the service, you'll be invited to use this chat feature to post your joys and sorrows. You may also be able to change what you see on your screen from speaker to gallery, which can let you see more than one person at a time. And just a reminder that we're recording and streaming on Facebook Live. So right now in chat, as I see many of you already are, post how many people are joining from your connection so we can get a sense of how many are joining us. And if you're visiting for the first time, I invite you to introduce yourself, as I see Sonia already did this morning. And if you'd like to, you could privately chat to Reverend Rachel with contact information if you'd like to learn more about the church and our community. After service today, we will have coffee hour breakout rooms, and you'll receive a pop-up notification with an invitation to join one of these breakout rooms. If you'd like to stay in the main room and have a larger conversation, you can decline that invitation and stay. Otherwise, it'll be split up into a smaller group. I do have a couple of announcements. We still have an auction event this afternoon at 4 p.m. You can find that on our website or in the newsletter. And did you know that Paint Branch has its own YouTube channel? All of our online services for the past 2 months are posted there. So if you go to YouTube and search for Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church, you'll be able to find them. And now I will hand it over to Rachel for opening words.
Thank you, Clark, and good morning. My name is Reverend Rachel Christensen. I'm the minister here at Paint Branch, and I'm so glad you have each joined us this morning. It is an absolutely spectacular day outside, although I know that it's going to get warm. And I mean, this warm weather in the first 10 days of November feels like unusual, but just enjoy the sunshine. It's just wonderful. And yes, we had an election, and we finally got results yesterday, or a final count in terms of, or at least a projection of winning for the president. And I think that having answers has brought relief to many of us and some sense of closure on that. So thank you for being here today as we finish our sense, or begin to process our sense of that election and the process of being in this country when we do that work of democracy. We are going to right now start some piece of that with some special music. It is a montage of the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key, with a montage of voices of mostly children from all over the country. Please enjoy.
Oh, you are muted, Rachel.
Now, Christine Chianese will light our chalice.
Good morning. I'm so grateful to be here this morning. My name is Christine Chianese. I am a queer mother of 3 strong daughters and proud spouse of my partner, Tanya, who I legally married in 2013, but have been with since 2004. I am also a psychologist who specializes in trauma. The last 4 years have been difficult personally, but especially distressing professionally. But yesterday, I believe many of us started the healing process. When we heal from trauma, we move from a place of mistrust to trust and begin to believe that there are more good people than bad in this world. I truly believe that and hope that we can all move forward and begin this process. With these words, I light this chalice. We light the chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open minds, the helping hands, the loving heart, and the radiant spirit. Encendamos este caliz para celebrar el Unitarismo Universalismo. Esta es la iglesia de la mente abierta, de las manos amigas, del amor del corazón y del espíritu radiante.
So I'm going to share a story, a few at least excerpts of a story, She Persisted, which was written about 13 American women who changed the world. I won't read them all, by Chelsea Clinton and illustrated by Alexandra Boyger. Sometimes being a girl isn't easy. At some point, someone will probably tell you no, will tell you to be quiet, and may even tell you your dreams are impossible. Don't listen to them. These 13 American women certainly did not take no for an answer. They persisted. Harriet Tubman was born a slave, and her story could have ended there. Instead, she persisted, escaping from slavery and becoming the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. She risked her life many times to lead countless slaves to freedom, including her family, friends, and strangers. Every person she led to freedom arrived safely. After her family fled poverty and the threat of violence in Ukraine for a new home in New York, Clara Lemlich got a job working in a garment factory. She wrote that the factory's conditions made women into machines, and so she persisted, organizing picket lines and strikes that ultimately helped win better pay, shorter hours, and safer working conditions for thousands of workers, both women and men. Nelly Bly became a reporter in part because a male writer had said that working women were a monstrosity. And she wanted to prove that women could do anything, at times putting her safety at risk. She persisted throughout her career in exposing real monstrosities, pretending to be a sweatshop worker and a patient in a mental hospital to show how badly people were being treated. Inspired from an early age by her brother's childhood illness, Virginia Apgar was determined to be a doctor long before many girls had such dreams. Even though she qualified to be a surgeon, the male head surgeon at her hospital discouraged her because she was a woman. Nevertheless, she persisted, becoming an anesthesiologist and creating the Apgar score to test a newborn baby's health, which hospitals all over the world still use today. As a 15-year-old riding a bus home from school in Montgomery, Alabama, Claudette Colvin was expected to give up her seat to a white woman just because she was African American. In her refusal to get up, she persisted in taking a stand for what's right, helping to inspire Rosa Parks to make the same choice 9 months later, an act many point to as starting the modern civil rights movement. Sally Ride always believed women could succeed in any math or science career, although not everyone agreed. She persisted and she became the first American woman in space. But that wasn't enough for Sally. She traveled into space once more, and then created science and engineering programs specifically for girls, so she could help generations of young women achieve their dreams too, both on Earth and in outer space. While watching fictional judges on television inspired Sonia Sotomayor to want to be a real-life judge when she grew up. She knew she'd have to speak English as well as she spoke Spanish, study hard in school, and manage her diabetes before she could one day wear a judge's robes with gavel in hand. She persisted, eventually becoming a Supreme Court justice and the first ever Latina to sit on the highest court. So if anyone tells you no, if anyone ever says your voice isn't important or your dreams are too big, remember these women. They persisted, and so should you. I think a lot of us still have persisting to do. Get my words back up here. There it is. Okay. And now, as we come to our intonation in the sharing of joys and sorrows, let us join our hearts and minds in a time of prayer and meditation. As we gather in community, we carry with us life's hurts and its great joys. Sometimes sharing these joys and concerns in community can help. You are now welcome to share your written joys and sorrows by entering them into the chat bar as David plays The Other Side of the Game, as performed by Erykah Badu and the Roots. In this moment of quiet, may our hearts open to hope and healing. May our minds open to peace and possibility. Let us have a moment of silence. May we hold all these and one another in love and kindness, so that this congregation may be a source of strength and comfort, courage and hope in the days and weeks ahead. So thank you, David, for that music. So how are you feeling? I know a lot of people are happy. I've seen pictures from friends celebrating in downtown DC. I overheard someone at the liquor store yesterday asking for a particular type of sparkling wine that this location turned out was completely sold out of. Manager said he hadn't ordered enough to keep up with the reaction. So some people are probably very sad and shocked and mistrustful of the results of last week's election. Though based on the lawn signs around my neighborhood, probably not so many of the folks around here. How do I feel? There is a sense of relief. I've seen several people express that emotion, like Chris did during our chalice lighting. I think we'll be able to get back to the hard work of running a country instead of barely holding on to one as we lurch from crisis to crisis. I'm also very sad that there are tens of millions of people who cast votes that run contrary to my values. Votes that I can't see any acceptable justification for after seeing what's happened and what's been said over the last 4 years. That's a first principle problem for me. I shouldn't attribute malicious motives to people who may have reasons that make sense to them in their world, given what they believe. I asked a friend in Arkansas if she'd be willing to talk politics with me yesterday as I was working on this reflection. I said I wanted to hear what things looked like to her from out there. She turned me down. We've known each other since we were 4. This is the only person I ever actually text on their birthday. We've talked about politics with each other's families for ages, as long as I can remember. Not this time. Not yet, at least. She's not the only person there who's shut down a conversation about politics in recent weeks. So my overall reaction to last week is that we've got a lot of work to do, both at a personal level and at a national level. But what can we possibly do if we have to work with people on the other side? I was talking to my wife, Megan, while writing this, and she has a powerfully logical mind, and she laid out all the possibilities. So after we throw out disenfranchising the other side, which would be against several UW principles, like the 5th one, so that's out, or seceding, not what we're going for here, we're really just left with compromise, which is possible in some cases, and persuasion, which does work sometimes. Persuasion had come up in an earlier conversation as I was uncharitably ranting about how I feel like those people I disagree with must be just irredeemably bad because, among other things, for instance, they fundamentally can't accept LGBTQIA rights. Megan pointed out that that's a weak example because over the course of our own lifetimes, the majority of Americans have come to favor marriage equality, for instance. A combination of national campaigns and individuals coming out to their friends and family has persuaded a lot of people. And there are other things that help me see a way forward. There were Black Lives Matter events all over the country last summer, including near my hometown in Arkansas. The ballot measure to let a bipartisan commission redraw Virginia's congressional districts rather than the legislature passed in this election. Some states made changes that made voting easier for people, and voter turnout was a record high. That ought to be encouraging for UUs with our fifth principle about the democratic process. And of course, the vice president-elect is a Black Asian American woman. That's several firsts for that office. So I feel like I can pause to take a deep breath or two. I heard a speech last night talk about how this should be a time to heal. I'm not there yet, and I'm guessing that my friend in Arkansas isn't either. I admit that I'm still having a hard time seeing a reason I can accept for having been on the other side in this, but I do want to get there. And with that, I will hand it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Clark. Our fifth principle, as Clark mentioned, says that we will affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. We have seen the democratic process in action all this week, watching with perhaps joy or trepidation, held in suspense by the counting of the ballots in several states. We have watched workers open and check ballots, navigating the sea of ballots held in vast rooms. We have watched observers being present, sometimes protesters outside the doors. I found I was compulsively checking the results on the computer several times an hour sometimes, in spite of my advice to you to stop the checking. Perhaps you have been the same. After the election, the election now has finally been called based on the count, the ballots, and as the AP said, on math. We all know it's not official until each county certifies their count, and then each state certifies that count, and we know way more about the actual process from there than we did before. There was so much passion and energy and commitment around the vote this year. I served as a voter guardian at a precinct in York, Pennsylvania on Tuesday morning. I left home about 5 a.m. in order to be at the polls by 7. By the time I got there, there was a long line of people stretched out the door and along the driveway, and it was cold. My role was to welcome the voters, be a nonpartisan supporter of the process, and an advocate for those who were new or who felt unsure or intimidated. My partner, Tom, and I answered questions, provided masks to those who needed them, and thanked them for voting. It appeared to be a generally pretty conservative group of voters. They were passionate about being there. It was their job to vote, and they weren't going to miss it. They were clearly invested in the outcome and glad to see their friends and neighbors come out to vote. Most people were very friendly, some chatting a bit about voting, about the weather, about issues, but we all pretty much stayed away from the main question of the presidential candidates. A few people were decidedly cool to our presence. We had put a sign up about election protection with a phone number to call if you needed help, and maybe that's why. There had been news about militias coming to the polls, and that's why we were there. There were a few people who quietly took me aside and said, "Thank you for being here." We stayed until almost 2 p.m. when the next shift arrived, and I'm grateful to say it was completely uneventful, both in our location and throughout the county where we were serving. But as you know, this country is deeply divided. Some counties, some states voted more than 2-to-1, one way or the other. Even here in Maryland, we have some counties voting overwhelmingly for Trump, some for Biden, passionate about their vote, about the candidates, about the outcome. And had the vote been going the other way, there may have been different protesters out, different people wanting better access to watch the count, different lawsuits being considered. The truth is, we don't understand each other We don't understand how we can be so divided, how we can come to completely different conclusions about the state of the world, the issues facing this country, and the state of our culture. We don't understand each other. Our fifth principle calls us to the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. That asks us to consider the issues, to evaluate them in light of our values, to educate ourselves, and to vote. But the electorate in this country is not getting the same education. We are not listening to the same news or hearing the same stories. We cannot come to the same conclusions or to a common understanding of the world because we do not seem to live in the same soup of culture. This is actually not new. Our country has been deeply divided before, and it will be again. We live in different bubbles, even before the pandemic made that a thing. We live and breathe different cultures, different kinds of work and landscapes, and face different challenges. We are the product of our experience, tempered by our curiosity, our encounters, and the things we read and learn. So what does it take to make a shift in this current divisiveness? I heard someone ask, what will it take for more people to realize that we need to rethink the way of the world? I think it is disruption that causes us to really shift our thinking, our view of the world. A disruption from the norm that happens to us personally, but more importantly, that happens to the culture at large. Something big and dramatic that gets our attention. In 1965, as Martin Luther King and John Lewis and hundreds of residents of Selma tried to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, they were stopped by police and local deputized posse, some on horseback. Some of the marchers were beaten, some of them to unconsciousness, and they turned back, escaping the attacks being levied against them. Earlier in 1963, there were frequent demonstrations in the public park in Birmingham, and Sheriff Bull Connor used dogs and fire hoses to clear the people out, even children. Photographs of both of these events and moments brought the reality of the issues in Alabama to the awareness of people outside of the South. The rest of the country, more of white America, began to understand the risks to Black people in the South. The photographs contributed to a disruption in the American consciousness that caused a shift of thinking. Too many white people had been ignorant of the conditions being faced, maybe willfully ignorant, but ignorant nonetheless, and this pulled them up by the collar, inviting them to support and sometimes to act, to help in the American South. These events led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Disruption. It takes disruption to pull us out of our comfortable understanding of things, and they forces us to rethink. I wondered this year if the killing of George Floyd might turn out to be such a disruption. It moved many white people to a different understanding of the risks of being Black and encountering the police in this country. It pushed many of us to grapple with the disparities and to the grief faced by Black people every day. We now see and hear weekly stories of death of Black men at the hands of police and are asking questions about enforcement, justice, training, bias, and risk. Disruption drives shifts in this country because it begins the process of shifting the narrative, shining a light on the fact that we do not have a common understanding of the world. White people have a different understanding than Black people. Fox News listeners have a different understanding than PBS NewsHour listeners. Significant disruption forces its way into the consciousness of people across the spectrum. It is not perfect. It does not cause change instantly, but it does introduce a new perspective into the corporate mind of the country. We have had significant disruption in the country this year. President Trump has been a disruption because of his pattern of tweeting, of sowing mistrust in science and the elections, and of championing far-right and violent movements. Disruption may not always go in the direction you would wish. The coronavirus and COVID-19 have been disruptive to our life and work patterns, to the economy, to our understanding of risk and safe behaviors. George Floyd's killing and the subsequent demonstrations and actions protesting his death at the hands of police have been disruptive. They have provided graphic evidence of the mistrust of the police that many people feel at a visceral level and have experienced and continue to experience. Hurricanes and wildfires have brought attention to the issues of climate change and call us to be more proactive about addressing our risks and contributions to climate change. Clark spoke about the difficulty of talking across the divide, even with lifelong friends. I think that disruptions such as those cited above will be part of what is necessary for us to begin to shift our narrative, our understanding of the world. Imagine that I too need to gain a broader understanding of the reality of living in farm states, because we do not understand each other. I hope you can see that disruption is part of the change that happens in our world. It forces us to admit to things we haven't understood, to the reality facing other people, or the ways in which we are living in different realities. Disruption is necessary, but not sufficient. It is a part of forcing us to confront things in this country, of how we each live with different understanding of life, of justice, of opportunity, of risk. Disruption, shaking things up, or good trouble, in the words of John Lewis, we are in the middle of it. The election is part of that disruption, confirming not only divisions, the fact that we truly don't understand each other, but also it makes manifest that there is another truth. Much of the country has rejected the divisive rhetoric, the violent threats, the fear of Black and brown and urban people. Much of the country wants to address racism, justice, and compassion in our work, in our relationships, in our communities. Let us recognize these forms of disruption as they percolate into the national conversation, shifting our understanding of the world and ourselves. Let us celebrate the incremental shifts that are taking place and continue to take place in this country. Let us not lose the passion for transforming the world, for building on the disruptions that we see and experience, and realize that they are part of the necessary and dramatic change in narrative in order to more broadly develop a common understanding and story in this world. In the civil rights movement, the broadcasting of the horrible violence perpetrated by law enforcement helped to shift the national appetite and support for systemic change in the world. May we not ever have to go through that again. But if the news and the actions today can tell a different story, can amplify the fact that there are misleading and false stories being told, and can cause shifts in our understanding and awareness. May we work to broaden our own awareness and understanding and celebrate as we move toward a more shared narrative in this country. May it be so. May we now sing together hymn number 1014, Answering the Call of Love. This is a song that the composer, Jason Shelton, has asked us to change the lyrics to Answering the Call of Love. The words will be shown on your screen.
The mission of this church carries on in these uncertain times and is more important than ever. We are so grateful to have the financial support of our members and friends. Please give as generously as you are able. You will see posted in chat the information for giving to PBUUC. This information can also be found in the online order of service. Our offertory music will be Reflections by John Kimber.
Thank you, David. That was beautiful. So needed. Thank you for being with us today for this worship service as we continue to process the election, the process of that election, the stories of people across this country who are affected in so many different ways by the work we do, by our elections, by the sense of being included or not. May we continue to try to expand that inclusion and know that the journey is long and change does happen. Today we will have breakout rooms after the service. I will remain in the large room right here for a conversation with any of you who'd like to talk about the service with Clark and me. There'll also be small rooms, breakout rooms, for those of you who'd like to have a smaller conversation. Please join me as we sing Fuente de Amor, Spirit of Life. All the words will be displayed on the screen.
I will now extinguish the chalice. Thank you.